Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I believe I was targeted by human traffickers. By spirituaIbox. I, 20 female, work part-time at a small business in my local mall and usually work alone. I am a sales associate, so I'm required to talk to customers and encourage them to buy things. It was the last hour of my shift when a creepy man came in. He was about mid-40s and everything about him was odd. I.e., clothes didn't fit, expensive shoes, socially awkward. He originally asked a pretty standard question about a less expensive item that I happily answered. After this, though, he continued to ask questions almost as if he wanted to keep my attention to him. He then asked if he can try out our most expensive item in the store, which is a massage chair, and I say yes. We let everyone try it out. At this point, I just thought he was an innocent yet socially awkward guy. He gets in the chair to try it out and continues to ask unusual questions. We chit-chat a bit and I tell him the massage chair's features and the price of it. All of a sudden, the questions get more personal. He asked me what high school I went to and if I missed it. Me being naive, I said the high school I went to and that I didn't miss going. He said some story about a teacher I never heard of and said he missed high school a lot. He asked if I lived around there, in which I avoided the question, but implied that I lived close. He then repeatedly asked me the price of the chair and asked me to calculate the price along with our second most expensive item in the store. I thought he was fully interested and was convinced he was about to buy it. We made commission on the chair, so I ignored his creepiness because I wanted to make the sale. He keeps insisting that he needs to walk out with the chair today, and he has a truck that is big enough to hold it. It seemed I finally answered his questions to his liking because I was able to walk away a bit. He then made a phone call and started describing how I look, my age, where I live approximately, and what store I work at. He then said to the person on the phone, "We got one. We got one." I had suspicion that he was creepy, but this confirmed it. I asked him from behind the cashier's counter, "You're not talking about me, right?" He shook his head no. He then stood up from the chair and said he will not be buying the chair today. I was so scared and alone. No one else around but me and him. I ran to the back and grabbed all my stuff and pulled out my pocket knife. He then left the store and hung out right outside the only entrance/exit. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay inside the mall. I waited for him to go out of sight and then quickly locked the store doors and ran outside to my car. I called my manager and she said I had to close the store properly, turn off the lights, and count the register. So she told me to go into the nearby store in the mall and call for a security escort. I did that, was escorted back to the store to close up, and was escorted back to my car with no further incident. I live in a city with one of the highest rates of human/sex trafficking in the country. Was I being targeted by human traffickers? Edit. I appreciate all the support and education on human trafficking and how they target their victims. When I wrote this post, I was not educated on the topic, and that was the first thing that came to mind when I had this encounter. I realize now that this was not human trafficking, but still a scary encounter nonetheless. Because I would like to have some clarification for you guys about what actual human trafficking looks like, I'm going to read a comment from down below. Good Cause 2679 wrote, "I work in anti-human trafficking field, so I like to chime in here. First of all, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I'm sure this was terrifying. You did the right thing by walking away from the man and calling for an escort to assist you. In my opinion, this is just another creepy guy who is odd and has no social skills. Yes, these type of people can scare the heck out of us and intimidate us because we don't know how to interact with them or know their exact intentions. But as far as human trafficking goes, this does not line up with how human trafficking works. Kidnapping, yes, but human trafficking, no. Let me explain. Human traffickers groom their victims over a period of time. Could he be starting this process with you? Maybe. Please don't give him any more information about yourself. Grooming is wining and dining their victims, buying them expensive items, telling them positive things about themselves, and building them up, and having them eventually trust the trafficker to the fullest extent. After this, the traffickers will convince the victim that they can't live without them. At this point, the victims are convinced and they go. The traffickers then have full control over their victims. Drugs usually enter the picture, and whatever type of trafficking starts to take place. For young women, it's typically sex trafficking. This is extremely hard for victims to escape due to being dependent on the traffickers, drugs, and fear of the traffickers. So again, as scary as it was for you, I do believe this was a creepy/old guy. His phone call was most likely to freak you out. I do advise you that if he comes back, discreetly get a photo of him and call your manager before you become too uncomfortable. Possibly even call mall security and ask them to come to your store and just observe. I hope this helps. Sorry that this took away from the stories, but I did want to showcase more closer to what human trafficking really looks like and a better way of actually protecting yourself from it. It's important we trust people, but we also have to be careful who we trust. And I'm going to take words from a podcast I listen to quite a bit. Be weird, be rude, stay alive, and always trust your gut. Now, with all that being said, let's get back to the stories. My brother remains oddly silent ever since he returned from the party last night, but I know he's not mad when he gently gives me today's paper. Studies reveal a new, highly contagious disease that causes immense pain in its victims and disables their speech so it can continue spreading. A Possible Pedophile Encountered Years Ago by Bibble206. I was 11 at the time, still young and carefree as a normal kid. I don't remember much about how or what happened because it's one of those memories that you just seem to forget as time goes on. But I will try to describe in best details as I possibly can. It was in the 6th grade, about to be into middle school years. My school gym was having a wrestling practice at the time. I didn't join it because I had forgotten to give my parents a permission slip to join before the deadline. But one day, the instructors, 2 girls who were teaching the class, decided to let some of the kids who didn't join come and practice for free. I guess for the fun of it, or there weren't enough students in the group. So I decided to go with my friends, and it was fun at first. We were taught ways to tackle someone to the ground and such. At one moment, I noticed one of the ladies was looking at us boys weirdly. Not in a way of watching us so that we were doing the moves properly, more in a observing, attracting kind of way. I didn't think much of it, so I went back to practicing the technique moves with my partner. Eventually, we were doing a workout, and I was on my hands and knees bending over on the mat, trying to do some sort of push-up we were doing to help us better, when I suddenly felt a slight tap on my back. I looked up in confusion to see one of the instructors kinda hovering over me, staring down at me that made me a bit uncomfortable. She looked like she was smiling just a smidge, and from what I remember, she gave me a subtle wink. I found it kind of off-putting, but yet again, I didn't think much of it and went back to doing my exercises. After the lesson was over, I felt kind of weirded out with that lady. She honestly gave me the creeps, but I just brushed it off. She and her colleague were only there for about 2 weeks, and I never saw them again. It wasn't until sometime after that I realized she could have been acting like that quite possibly due to some weird attraction pedophilia. I honestly didn't know what to think, and maybe I misunderstood and overreacted and thought wrong about her. I didn't tell anyone about it, and even if I did, it wouldn't have been a big deal as there was no proof of it being true. There were no witnesses, and I never even caught her name. It still confuses me. I'm not so hung up on it nowadays. It didn't affect me badly in any way. But I still feel quite guilty over it, and that it still sits in my mind as a weird but vague memory. I know it's not your average scary story, but I was only a kid still, so I didn't understand the whole meaning of it till I got older and learned of what older people can do to such young and innocent children, and that to me is chilling enough. It also taught me the importance of being aware of those around you, because you never know what they are capable of. This was 6 years ago, and the thing that disturbs me the most about this whole thing is how she could have possibly been deviant later on, or even acting on her sexual desires to others unexpectedly and getting away with it. And I did nothing to speak up about it. After I watched my parents brutally gunned down in an alley, I made a promise to conduct a never-ending crusade of justice on crime wherever it may hide. I soon found out I was not brave enough for this work, but I knew if I recreated this event enough times, I would eventually find a child who is. I don't know if I would have made it out of the woods if I had done what he wanted me to do. By Sweet Tangerine. Hello, I just came across this subreddit, and gosh, some of these are terrifying. I do have a story of something that happened to me from a long while ago, but in hindsight, it was really dumb of me, and I feel terribly dumb now. So I've always been hesitant to tell a lot of people I know about it. Except for my psychologist, lol. And I always apologize for long posts, so it's so hard not to here. There were some other conversations had with this man named John. It was mostly him talking. But I left some of them out for length's sake. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30, 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we gotten home, he tossed me out onto the front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn for the party, and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him. So I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to the gas station and motel, which is like a little less than a mile away. so I could use their phone to try and call my girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on is called Donor Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stop and begin to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I was just about frozen up, but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked me what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride, and I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good, I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like someone who needs some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I moved my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was a truck he took hunting. But it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked me why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attractive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him, and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog. I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save the battery. We approached the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows, watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location." But I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle, and how it'd be a lot harder to get away with one foot as to opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. But then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though, like there was nothing but trees and an empty road and us. I was crying pretty bad at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started to talk underneath his breath. "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me. dressed like a slut, and other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type out here, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remember the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop his handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try and help myself, like if we were close to some upcoming lights or structures, if I even made it to them. I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be drunk driver and we get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night and how if I did anything it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off the road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooden trees were closer to the road. On mine, there were small gaps fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 or 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and he shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I'd ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this, way I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car and I sank towards the window, scared he would drag me out over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and looking back at me and then back out his window again. He heard me shuffling my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of this car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me. In case he had a hunting rifle in the back, I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point, I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserves, and instead of panic, there was a numbness and exhaustion. There were still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychologist about this sort of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriend giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audible told him that my friend was still waiting for me and asked him about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking about what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily. He just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, He told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me he was just teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changed his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try and see his license plate. I turned around, but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fear melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number that I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out, saying there was nothing was on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting in him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just naive to think it could never happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from the one time I was told my case number didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend, whose house I slept over at that night, if she had ever heard any, weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again. So it was a lesson. It certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with my case. I never heard any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. This has also been super therapeutic to let out, so thank you so much for listening to me. Also, I'm not really the biggest fan of the few of you trying to inbox me saying you're John. So if you could maybe not, that would be super neat. Thank you. I usually enjoy eating meat because the images of their happiest moments flood my mind. Chuckling with their family, dancing in the mud, frolicking through the fields. But I spat my burger out with a panic when I remembered the tears in my meat's eyes as they were handed their high school diploma. And with that, my friends, our time together is coming to an end. As always, I would like to thank the writers who let me read their stories today. As always, I hope you all stay safe and, except for that last person, trust your gut. I'm going to say with the last person, you might want to find someone else's gut to trust. And truth be told, I haven't always been able to trust my own either. But I can happily say, in the end, you found a way out of it. I don't know what that gentleman wanted from you, but it wasn't anything good. And it seems you became more trouble than you were worth to him. And if you enjoyed that little information I did about the human trafficking and how it's different than we expect, I can go a little more in depth of certain things that I enjoy. I do really enjoy true crime, and to me, psychology and Figuring out why people are the way they are and what they do and how they do it is very interesting to me, and I'd be more than willing to do more research and search into things if that is something you guys are more interested in. But if you guys just want the stories, I can keep the stories. But when I see a moment that I can educate people who might not get it somewhere else, I will take it. And to me, understanding the difference between kidnapping/abduction and actual human trafficking is very important. So that way we actually can keep an eye out for real victims and people who are about to be victimized. This is always going to be important to me, and I hope you guys truly agree. Now, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications so you don't miss anything else that I'm up to. Also, please share this video, channel, podcast with anyone who might enjoy this content. It really helps with the growth, and it helps YouTube with all these things to know that people are really interested in the content I'm putting out there, and hopefully showing it to some new eyes. And if you'd like to get early access to these videos, or extra stories, or have a little more say on what I'm doing, well, I do have Patreon and memberships. And at this moment, there's just not that many where I have ideas of things I would like to do in the future. It's just the numbers aren't quite there where I can see it worth the time and effort at this moment. And truthfully, I would love to change that. I also have PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee if you just want to do a one-time donation. All this stuff will always be appreciated, never expected. I know I bring it up every video, but it's the only way to get people to know the other ways of supporting the channel. With all that being said, well, if you do want to interact with me, you can always also leave me a comment, because I actually do reply to all of them. But let's get you that Sunday word first to help you along with that. On screen right now is everyone who used last week's word. As always, guys, thank you so much. I really enjoy seeing these. Now, onto this Sunday's word, which is excavation. EXCAVATION. I like to pick words that are just kind of weird and like to see what people are going to do with them. If you're on YouTube, you can write me a sentence down below using this word, and you'll be in next week's photo. If you're on the podcast or somewhere else, you can @ me on Twitter at 242reads, write me a sentence using this word, and you'll be in next week's photo as well. And I have actually done this before. Sorry that this outro was a little bit longer. I had a little more to say this time. But as always, thank you guys for watching and listening. It really means the world to me. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.